We'll start with the Attorney General and Gabriel Hall with KLRD, an overview. Welcome, Gabriel.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning, committee. My name is Gabrielle Hull, and I will be presenting the Attorney General's budget. I did want to mention that Derek Schmidt, the Attorney General, is attending in person today, and he will provide testimony and can answer some questions at the completion of my presentation. So just to begin, you should have a copy of the Attorney General's draft BA in front of you. The Attorney General is a constitutional statewide elected official who's the legal officer of and advocate for the state and serves as its chief legal officer. The office is organized into 11 programs, each of which are detailed within the budget analysis. The first 7 pages of the budget analysis offer an overview and some background information on the agency. We will begin on page 8 under the header fiscal year 2021 current year. So beginning at the bottom of the page, the agency requests a revised estimate of $26.9 million, including $7.1 million SGF in fiscal year 21. This is an all funds increase of a little over $264,000 or 1%. And an SGF increase of a little over $249,000 or 3.6% above the fiscal year 2021 approved budget. The SGF increase is attributable to the agency's supplemental request for the Victim Services Division to develop a mobile phone application to communicate with youth for the purpose of preventing youth suicide. Absent the supplemental request, the agency requests a revised estimate of $26.6 million, including $7 million SGF in fiscal year 2021. This is an all funds increase of $14,998 or 0.1%, and an SGF decrease of $182 or less than 0.1% from the fiscal year 2021 approved amount. Moving on to the top of page 9, the revised estimate includes 173.3 FTE positions, which is an increase of 0.2 FTE positions. And the increase is attributable to off-budget FTE positions for the agency representation in the Legal Opinions and Government Counsel Division. Turning to page 9, at the top, the governor recommends expenditures of $26.7 million, including $6.8 million SGF in fiscal year 2021. This is an all funds decrease of a little over $165,000 or 0.6%, and an SGF decrease of $300,000 or 4.2% below the agency's revised estimate. The decrease is attributable to reducing the use of SGF monies and increasing the use of agency fee funds. Additionally, the governor does not recommend the agency's Victim Services supplemental request. This accounted for a total of $250,000 SGF. The governor does concur with the agency's request of 173.3 FTE positions, and the agency's supplemental request is further detailed on page 10. And Mr. Chair, I can pause now for questions on fiscal year 2021, or I can continue and take questions at the end.
Any questions on 10? Seeing none, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are on page 11. At the top of the page, there's a detail of the governor's allotment. The governor's July 2020 allotments reduced the agency's budget by $39,364 without any required legislative approval, and those are detailed on the top of page 11. Still on page 11, moving on to fiscal year 2022, the agency requests $26.3 million, including $6.5 SGF for fiscal year 2022. This is an all funds decrease of just over $424,000 or 2%, and an SGF decrease of just over $596,000 or 8.3% below the fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. And the primary reason for For the decrease is the reappropriation of funding from fiscal year 2020 into fiscal year 2021 that does not reoccur in fiscal year 2022. The agency requests 50,000 SGF for fiscal year 2022 enhancement requests. The agency requests this enhancement for computer maintenance service costs related to the youth suicide prevention website and phone application that was included in their supplemental request for fiscal year 2021. Absent the enhancement request, the agency requests a revised estimate of $26.3 million, including $6.5 million SGF. This is an all funds decrease of just over $574,000 and an SGF decrease of a little over $646,000 below the fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. And the request includes 173.3 FTE positions, which is unchanged from the fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. We'll now turn to page 12. At the bottom of the page, the governor recommends expenditures of $26.2 million, including $5.9 million SGF for fiscal year 2022. This is an all funds decrease of $122,200 or 0.5%, and an SGF decrease of just over $700,000 or 10.7% below the agency's request. The decrease is primarily attributable to the acceptance of the agency's reduced resources budget detailed on page 13, which includes a decrease of $650,296, all SGF, with most of the reduction being replaced with agency fee funds. Additionally, the governor does not recommend the agency's victim services enhancement request, which accounts for $50,000 in SGF. And Mr. Chairman, this concludes my overview. The remaining pages do detail the 11 programs within the Attorney General's office, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Questions? Derek Schmidt. Welcome to committee, Derek.
It's the first time I've testified in person this year, so thank you for allowing that. Generally, we're in agreement with the governor's recommendation. We don't have an objection to it, other than two items I do want to raise. The first I want to raise for your situational awareness, because I want to be sure that the committee understands that if we go down this path, we know where it leads. Although we can do it for this year, I want to be sure we understand the choice we're making. The second, I would request that the subcommittee at least entertain the idea of altering one provision in the governor's recommendation with respect to the youth suicide application. The first item, the situational awareness item, obviously we would have preferred not to have taken a 10% SGF hit, but we understand the circumstances we're in, and we complied with the request to submit a reduced resources budget, and the governor adopted it. So the 10% SGF reduction is built into the governor's recommendation. The way we did that was that we shifted a number of what I'll call essential programs. I almost hate to use that word these days, but core function programs that are paid for with our SGF appropriation each year. We shifted them to another funding source for this year, our court cost fund, or basically litigation recoveries. So let me back up to the big picture on why I just want to flag this as an issue for the committee. We are about a $27 million a year agency, give or take. It fluctuates substantially every year. It's hard to predict, and here's the main reason why. Because since we're the state's defense counsel and under the Tort Claims Act, whenever a state actor gets sued and loses, if they've requested tort claims coverage, that judgment gets paid out of my budget. So if the Department of Corrections has an employee who's sued for mistreating an inmate, I'm just picking a hypothetical example, and ultimately there's a federal court judgment of $1 million, it's going to be the Attorney General's budget, not the DOC budget, that reflects the payment of that $1 million. I'm not complaining about that. There's an efficiency to doing it in that centralized way, but that's why it's very difficult for us to predict what our actual expenditures will be, especially for defense of the state, because we don't know who's going to sue whom when, and we don't know which ones are going to get lost and have to pay a judgment. So our top line number does fluctuate with some regularity. In any event, we're about a $27 million a year agency we project for this year, and that's probably going to be about correct. Of that, about $7 million is SGF. So the vast bulk of what we expend is funded in other ways. Of the $7 million in SGF, almost all of that goes to our criminal prosecution function and our criminal litigation division, our criminal prosecution function in a couple of other places in the office, although that's a much smaller piece, our crime victim support work, and legal representation of state agencies. The things that are, for lack of a better term, they're not money makers. They're core functions of state government, criminal prosecution, representing state agencies, and general counsel work. Victim services, that was a policy choice the legislature made several years ago to shift most of the victim support programs that we administer off of fee funds and onto SGF. So we're doing what we were told to do on that. So those are pretty core functions. Our view has always been that those things ought to be paid by tax dollars because they're not money makers. That was not always the view of the office. And when I got here, we were, 10 years ago now, we were paying a lot of that cost out of litigation recoveries. I was critical of that, still am, because I don't think the Attorney General's office ought to be run like a plaintiff's law firm. I don't think I or whoever's in the role at a given time ought to be looking at our out-year budgets, figuring how much money we have to have in the pipeline, so to speak, in anticipated litigation recoveries for next year, the year after, and the year after, in order to pay for our criminal prosecution work in those years. I think it has a tendency to skew how you look at enforcement actions on the civil side. If I bring a civil enforcement action, I'm not a managing partner in a private firm whose mission is to represent clients and make money. I'm essentially a managing partner of a public firm whose mission is to enforce the law in a fair and even-handed manner. So I don't think that that money piece, we ought to diminish how that plays in. Now, we still pay for significant office operations out of litigation recoveries. For example, our consumer protection work is entirely funded by the money that we get from our consumer protection enforcement. But that seems logical to me because there's a connection between the enforcement you're doing and the money coming in. It doesn't seem logical to say if we want to prosecute somebody who committed, a homicide in northwest Kansas in 2 years, I need to make sure that we've sued the right people today in order to have a likelihood of a recovery in 2 years to pay for the prosecutor to do the work. So that's the philosophical shift that we've accomplished with your support over the last number of years. And the recommendation to go down 10% and substitute litigation recovery money for SGF moves us in the opposite direction. I'm not saying it's a disaster right now. We can do this for a year. But I just want the committee to understand the choice we're making if we start down this road, and I hope we don't continue down it for multiple years. That's point number one. Point number two, the very last testimony or paragraph of my written testimony sort of summarizes my point here, so if you want to see it in writing. But essentially it's this. In 2019, the legislature directed us by statute to create a youth suicide prevention coordinator and listed in the statute a number of things that we are supposed to do with that coordinator. One of those things is the development of a communications app. Some of you who were around at the time may remember this debate. The development of a communications app that will be uniformly available around the state, whether it's in schools or otherwise, where kids can access mental health services quickly or suicide prevention crisis services. That exists in some jurisdictions now. It doesn't exist in many jurisdictions in the state. You told us to make that happen. So I told you at the time we'd be thrilled to. We think it's a good idea. We'd have to come back to you and ask for money because that's not going to happen for free, and this is the year that those lines intersect. We have the RFPs out. They've closed. We're in the process of reviewing those bid documents in the manner provided. And so we came back and requested in our budget this year $250,000. Why $250,000? It was an estimate. I mean, we don't know what the number is going to be, but we had to estimate something in SGF to pay for it, which is what I told you I would do back in 2019. The budget, division of the budget of the governor's office, anyway, the rest of the administration said no on the SGF, and we understand the circumstance we're in. So we came back in our appeal and suggested an alternate method of funding that with no SGF hit. And basically, this was our recommendation. The governor's budget recommends that an annual payment that comes out of the tobacco settlement funds that goes to our office every year and has for longer than I've been around, it pays for our tobacco enforcement unit, which is the group of attorneys and analysts who make sure that the golden egg, that the goose isn't killed, that we remain in compliance with the tobacco master settlement agreement every year, which brings in 50 to 55 million, as you know, that goes elsewhere, not to our budget. We get a very small amount of that every year. It's 400 and some thousand. The governor's budget this year proposes, starting in 21, I believe, for 2 years, to interrupt that payment. First time in my memory that's been proposed, certainly the first time on my watch. And the argument, as I understand it, is that we've built up some balance in our enforcement fund, which is true. It's not a huge balance, but we've run a tight ship and we have a little extra cash. Our proposal would be just don't interrupt the payment, allow it to happen as it's happened every year for as long as we've looked back, and then give us some language that tells me to use that money, that accumulated balance from having run a tight ship, to pay for the suicide prevention app for kids that you all told us by statute to do. That seems sensible to me, particularly since if the money doesn't come to us, it goes into, ultimately, I believe, into CIF, and so it goes to children's programs, so there's logic. So we would ask that you consider that. Obviously, it's ultimately your policy choice. If we don't fund an app, we won't have one, but it does seem this would be a good time to get it up and going. And with that, I'd be glad to stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Derek. Questions? Senator Petty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General, for being here. I know you mentioned earlier in your testimony about I know you mentioned earlier in your testimony about not wanting to be dependent on having to actually that the bringing in money to your office and that and paying for other expenses. Wouldn't that also be true of our courts? I mean, aren't we also saying often to our courts that, hey, you're both in the judicial arena, that they need to be funding most of their budget by the fees that they charge through their work?
Well, Senator, without sort of going down the court funding debate, which I am well aware of over the years, I do think there is a difference between a fee and a litigation recovery. And we are, I think, unique in state government. If not, we're certainly very rare in funding any significant amount of ongoing operations through litigation recoveries. A fee, whether it's for the courts or for us, and we have some fees that you all have authorized and imposed and we administer, concealed carry licensing, for example. Our concealed carry licensing unit is run by a user fee that's paid by people who apply for permits. And that, I think, is at least analogous, where everyone is on the policy debate, to what you all have done with some of the court funding, where you've imposed certain fees, filing fees, and other types of fees on participants in the court. So those two, I think, are analogous. But that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is we fund a portion of our budget every year from, just pick on Senator Kirshen because he's here. I think Senator Kirshen, I think I've got evidence that Senator Kirshen has committed civil fraud in the Consumer Protection Act in the way he's marketed whatever he's marketing, sheep. You're selling sheep now, Dan. And so I bring a consumer protection lawsuit against Kirshen Enterprises and ultimately want him to pay a large civil recovery and stop deceiving people in how he's marketing his sheep. That money comes back, and a portion of that, by law, gets used to fund part of the operations of our office, basically my civil enforcement operation that I used in the first place. I don't have a problem with that, but I do have a concern when I'm expected to bring back so much money from suing Kirshen Enterprises and others that I then turn around and use part of that to pay for criminal prosecution when, Senator Billinger, gets so ticked at me, he kills me dead on the Senate floor when I'm visiting, and somebody's got to prosecute him. Those are two different functions. The mechanism for funding is different from a fee, even though a lot of times I know it gets accounted for as fee funds. It's not really a fee. So I know that's not a yes or a no, but I do think there's something of an apples and oranges comparison to the extent I'm talking about litigation recoveries, and the courts or anybody else are, and us to some extent in some ways, are looking at fee funds assessed by the legislature. Does that make sense, Senator?
I do have a couple other questions, but if other senators have questions.
Go ahead. You might as well get them over.
Okay. So you mentioned about, sometimes you don't really have that much control about what litigation you have to take on. But how about when you decide to join other states? How's that paid for?
Well, typically, there's no cost. Typically, those are revenue generators or they're zero cost items. Now, there are exceptions. For example, let me try to think of a current one that's not, that I can freely talk about. We're in litigation now against Google with certain allegations related to its advertising marketing practices. We've alleged, along with a number of other states, that Google's conduct violates antitrust law. There's going to be some upfront cost in that litigation. It's not a huge amount for Kansas, but there's going to be some, because you got to pay for experts and the types of things you do in litigation in order to hopefully get to the right outcome on the back end. We're able to pay for those costs, again, out of litigation recoveries. So, I mean, that would be the answer to your question. I don't know the numbers on the Google suit. That's not a large amount of money.
So generally, there's no upfront cost, or there's no cost. I mean, there is staff cost, isn't there, when you join suits?
Well, sure. I mean, we have the fixed cost of our people and our sort of overhead for everything we do. That's true whether we're, involved in multi-state litigation, in Kansas-only litigation, in providing a legal opinion to a member of the legislature to administer our victim services program. That's certainly true. And those fixed costs are built into, the budgets that you all approve each year. So yes, I mean, I don't mean to suggest that we can operate for free, but in terms of a delta cost, an additional cost because of a particular engagement or not, generally the answer is no, except in those few circumstances like I just described where there might be an upfront cost for the cost of the litigation itself, which of course we always hope to recover on the back end. So
Now, the Kansas Youth Suicide Prevention Center, a coordinator, I know that we passed that legislation. I have a little concern about the fact that this talks that your office has this coordinator position, and you're talking about the website marketing and an app, but yet KDAD's just got funding to coordinate with the national hotline. I can't remember what it's a 3-number hotline that's now going to be nationwide, and which makes a lot of sense. So is there some conflict here with between this and that? And it looks like when we have federal funds that are coming in that we are matching with, that we potentially may have to put in some state funds, that's a better use of our money than having us divisions in different locations.
yeah, I understand the point, Senator. I don't think it's a conflict. And in fact, our one person that does this coordinates regularly with KDHE, KDADs, and other private entities in the state. You may recall during the floor debate on that, I mean, we listened to it, of course, when it happened, and there was debate on the floor of the Senate about whether our office was the correct place to place the coordinator, whose role, of course, is to coordinate the various functions that other entities are performing. There were senators who felt strongly it should have been us. There were senators who felt strongly it should not have been us. There was a vote, and ultimately you decided we're it, and we're happy to do it. So I don't know how to answer that other than to say I don't think there's a conflict. I think the policy choice, as I understood it, was somebody who's not sort of in the middle of the agencies that are staffed up and spending significant amounts of money on these programs ought to be coordinating that. And the choice was it should be us. If you want to make a different choice, you could do that too, but had that debate and it was decided. So,
Senator Fagg. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the $250,000, Mr. Smith, does youth suicide prevention, from your perspective, this is fairly new, has that been service effective?
well, we haven't done it yet.
Oh, you haven't?
We haven't done it yet.
Okay.
Senator, one of the recommendations, we had in partnership with the Tower Mental Health Foundation back in, I think it was 2018. Let me start at the beginning. I'll make it compressed, but how we got here, I think, is maybe relevant to your question. Our office has attached to it by law something called the State Child Death Review Board and has for years. That entity is a group of solid professionals who every year review every death of every child under the age of 18 in Kansas, and they ultimately make recommendations to you and to me and to others on things we might do better to avoid those deaths. It's very useful. Because that's attached to us, I look closely at their report every year. One of the things that we've noticed is that over the past 10-ish years, the number of deaths by suicide of kids 18 and under in Kansas has consistently increased. It's been a steady trend, which is concerning. Because of that, back in 2018, I joined with the Tower Mental Health Foundation and asked them and a group we put together to take a look at, are there things we ought to be doing that we're not in terms of youth suicide prevention? That task force had several recommendations, but one of the recommendations was that there ought to be a coordinator somewhere in state government to make sure the right hand and the left hand and both feet are all kind of coordinated in terms of our anti-suicide efforts. And in particular, they recommended that there ought to be several specific things done. They're in the statute cited in my testimony. But one of them, and the one that has the money attached to it, the one that really has an expense, is the creation of a web and phone-based app that's fairly uniform around the state so that kids who might be in crisis can quickly connect with services. As I said, in some jurisdictions that's very true already, but in some jurisdictions it's really not, and they wanted some uniformity. So that's how we got to this point. We haven't created that app yet because we don't have the money for it.
Okay. Derek, with all these fraudulent claims that Department of Labor is paying, is that going to be quite a burden for you folks to try to get some of that recovered? Or?
We don't know, Senator. I mean, what I've said to everybody, labor, federal authorities, legislators who have asked, is if we can find some of these bad guys, we are more than thrilled to either prosecute them criminally or try to go get money back if there's money to be had. The key for us is, because we're not the program administrators, we're enforcers, general on the back end. Key for us is we got to be able to find them. And so far, I think to say it's been a thin trickle of those who can be found would be even an overstatement. I suspect almost all of them are offshore, although if we can find them, we're happy to enforce. So I actually would like to think the answer, Senator, is yes, because it would mean we can find more of these guys, but the reality so far has been no.
Thank you. Any other questions? Senator Kirshen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your participation today. I had a question on that Sexual Predator Defense Fund that we use. That understand that you allocate about $50,000 every year. That's what the counties have to pay. They have somebody they have to prosecute, and they're supposed to get reimbursed by your office. Right. And when the money runs out, which it usually does, you have to wait till next year when you get refilled to pay those back claims.
Right. So, Senator, that's yes, that's sort of a sore point with some of the counties and I guess with us. So the issue here is the civil commitment statute, the sexually violent predators civil commitment statute, where people who have committed sexually violent crimes, when they come out of prison, they can be assessed, and if certain standards are met, essentially there's a likelihood that of reoffense based on a mental condition that is treatable. They can be civilly committed to Larned for an extended period. And we're responsible by that statute, which was enacted in the 90s, we're responsible for handling the civil litigation for the commitment. But there are things that the counties are responsible, and not just Pawnee County where Larned is, but the county where the case arose. And the counties incur costs from housing these guys, from some of the litigation costs related, you get the idea. And the statute has always provided that the counties can get reimbursement. But here's the crux of it. The way that mechanism is set up in the statute, if it's Sedgwick County, just to pick on Sedgwick County, if Sedgwick County spends, let's say, $150,000 to illustrate on civil commitment cases for sexually violent predators in a year, statute requires them to come to me first and ask for reimbursement. I'm authorized to reimburse out of the fund that you're asking me about. And if they can't get reimbursement that they're entitled to out of that fund, they then are authorized to go file a claim against the state. And they'll be back up here at the claims committee, and you all will consider paying. So obviously when there's a disconnect between the amount of money in the reimbursement fund and the expected amount of claims, it drives up your business on claims against the state, and at least in theory doesn't change the amount of money spent, because they can't get it out of the right pocket, so they come to the left. There might be some deterrent effect because some won't file a claim, but you get the idea. So we tried for several years, because there are always more claims than 50,000. We tried for several years in our budget to get that number increased on the theory it was administratively more efficient, but that was not met with a warm response. And so 50,000 has become sort of the standard default number. So that's mechanically how it works.
I've been on claims in
So you know, you know.
For several years, there was none, but then McPherson County had one and Butler County had one a little higher than normal. And it always comes back to us, and we end up paying those to the counties. But it's still, so it goes to SGF to pay it off. You know, I was just saying, if you had enough money to start with, it wouldn't have to run through the cycle. And I guess the counties get their money, but it takes them another year to get it.
I agree with you. We tried, there wasn't a willingness. If there's a willingness now, we'll be glad to try again, so.
We contemplated how to do that with the counties, but anyway, so thank you for that.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you, Derek. Appreciate you being here today. We'll close the hearing. And
Thank you. Thank you for your consideration.
next item we have is a hearing on the Secretary of State. And for an overview, we'll have Gabrielle Hall for KLRD on an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I did want to note Scott Schwab, the Secretary of State, does also joining us is Catherine Gonzalez. She is the Assistant Secretary of State, and they're both on WebEx. The Secretary of State is an elected official who serves as the custodian of official government documents for the state of Kansas. The Secretary administers laws relating to business entities, elections and legislative matters, and the Uniform Commercial Code, and performs other executive duties. To carry out its duties, the Office of the Secretary of State is organized into the Administration, Business Services, Elections and Legislative Matters, and the Help America Vote Act divisions. Again, the first 6 pages provide some helpful background and overview information, but we will be starting on page 7. The agency requests a revised estimate of $9.1 million, all from special revenue funds in fiscal year 2021. This is an all funds increase of $2.7 million, or 42.5% above the fiscal year 2021 approved amount. The increase is all from federal HAVA CARES Act expenditures and is granted to local units of government. And just for a little bit of background, in March 2020, Congress passed and President Trump signed the CARES Act. The HAVA CARES Act was to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus for the 2020 federal election cycle. Turning to page 8. The governor concurs with the agency's revised estimate in fiscal year 2021. And I can pause here, Mr. Chair, for questions on fiscal year 2021.
Any questions? Senator Cruz?
CARES Act, 42%. Didn't the CARES Act pay for that to start with? How's that working?
Yes, sir. So their budget increased by that amount, and those are federal expenditures, but their budget did increase by that federal expenditure amount. So that's just included in the paragraph to explain that.
Oh, okay, so that amount of money went to for that CARES Act.
Any other questions?
On page 8, the agency requests $6.9 million for fiscal year 2022. The request is an all funds decrease of $2.3 million, or 24.7%, and an SGF increase of $927,585 above the fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. The SGF amount is requested to satisfy federal grant match requirements for the HAVA CARES Act and to satisfy the additional 2020 election security grant state match requirement. The special revenue funds decrease is mainly attributable to the $2.7 million in HAVA CARES Act expenditures that occurred in fiscal year 2021 that will be fully expended in fiscal year 2021. Moving to page 9, the governor concurs with the agency's request for fiscal year 2022, and the governor recommends $927,585 as a direct SGF transfer to the Democracy Fund instead of an SGF appropriation to meet the state match requirement for the HAVA election security grant and HAVA CARES Act. The HAVA election funds must be in an interest-bearing account, so the Democracy Fee Fund was previously established through an appropriations bill for the receipt of matching dollars required for HAVA. So that was the rationale for that decision. Moving to page 10, the agency's enhancement request is detailed there that I previously discussed. Mr. Chairman, that does conclude my overview. I would be happy to stand for questions.
Any questions? Senator Petty?
Under the governor's recommendations of the direct SGF transfer to the Democracy Fund, so is so then there is no conflict? We now have this in an interest-bearing fund if that's approved?
Correct. That was approved several fiscal years ago, so that account already exists. And that will show up in the transfer list for SGF. So it'll be a direct SGF transfer to the Democracy Fee Fund.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Gabrielle. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, y'all. I hope you're doing okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Gabrielle, thank you so much for that overview. Some of what she was talking about with that Democracy Fund is a lot of what has happened in the budget last year. I want to say Senator Sullentrop was chair back then as we were going through that. And that fund was created years ago by then Secretary Ron Thornburg after the Bush v. Gore litigation, and created that account because by law it has to have interest bearing. And so it's just basically having to move dollars from one side to the other to be able to have interest bearing. Just to let you know, like other agencies, we're a little bit different than most. We run almost completely on fees. So some of the stuff I'm going to go through, just kind of keep in mind that we're fee funded. We don't get a whole lot of SGF money except for on certain examples, like, for example, matches on federal dollars. Now, this is the best news I hope you're going to get this morning, Mr. Chairman. After we submitted our budget to the governor, a few weeks after that was done, we got news from the EAC that distributes those federal dollars to our agency, that rather than just have a match, we can in-kind the match. So we did it after the end of we certified the election in November of 2020. Over the next several weeks, we started doing our post-election survey questions to the counties. We've got almost all those back. But what we found out what was donated, for example, Anheuser-Busch donated over 504 gallons of hand sanitizer and over 2,300 8-ounce bottles of hand sanitizer we were able to distribute to the county. That has a value. And because of that value, we can apply that to what was the $900+ that we were asking to transfer. Because of the amount of in-kind contributions such as that, we don't need the 920+ thousand. So we're going to encourage you to withdraw the $924,500 of that transfer and just leave it in SGF and reapply that where the committee needs. We would still request for $3,085 of SGF for that transfer, and this is for a different grant the feds through the EAC gave us. And I don't know how they do this, but they called us and said, hey, we found some money. I don't know if it was in a desk drawer or it was a check that wasn't deposited. I don't understand the federal budget process, but they had an additional $15,427 that we could use for election security. That does require the transfer of a match of $3,085. So the positive news is we're asking you to reduce that SGF transfer to just down to $3,000, from $920+ reduce it down to $3,085. So hopefully that makes your day a little bit easier. It gives you some breathing room on the budget process. Another thing that we're going to request, and this obviously wasn't going to be in the budget because it just happened last week, the Senate passed a constitutional amendment, and when those are passed, according to KSA 64103B, we have to publish that constitutional amendment in various markets across the state. And that doesn't come cheap, and we don't know what the costs are because every year they reset publishing excuse me, someone's trying to call me. They're trying to, we have to publish that in various media outlets throughout the state. We don't know how much that's going to cost. It can cost anywhere from $55,000 to $155,000. And it's based per inch, column inch in a newspaper. So as we print the constitutional amendment, we'll know how long that will be, and then we will get bids from newspapers across the state and fulfill our statutory duty to publish that constitutional amendment you all passed. So we're working with Jill Walters to make sure there's a proviso that would basically, just to get away from budget terms and make it real simple, when we get the bill for that, we would bill SGF and you just reimburse our agency for that. And that's traditionally some way we do it. We don't want to over budget for that. We want it directly to the penny so that we're not spending or receiving more than we need. Outside of that, if you take away the federal funds that we're dealing with and take away the constitutional amendment that we're going to have to pay for publishing, which is very important, our operational costs are relatively flat. They've gone up $24,000. That's just increasing some benefit costs for the employees in the agency. Outside of that, our budget is really pretty simple because we receive fees from the business unit and business filings, and we operate our whole agency on that, including the elections division and whatnot, because we really don't like the concept too much of using tax dollars to fund elections. We'd rather just use the fee side of things. So we're not asking for any structural changes in the way we fund our office. Outside of that, Gabrielle, again, did a fantastic job working with our agency. I really appreciate her hard work, and Jill as well. And with that, Mr. Chairman, whenever you're ready, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Scott. Questions? Seeing none, thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll close the hearing on Secretary of State, and we'll move on to the Insurance Department. And we'll have Martin DeBoer, KLRD, give us an overview.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. My name is Martin DeBoer. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes. All right, thank you. Before I start, again, I would like to bring up the Budget Committee and Subcommittee report out procedure. We'd like to bring this up first meeting of every subcommittee and committee meeting. Again, it outlines the process we will be using in lieu of having written signatures. You'll be receiving an email copies, which will need to be returned to us by 5 p.m. on the day before the budget hearing. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask us or send us an email, and we will follow up with you. That being said, I will start the overview of the Kansas Insurance Department. We do have the commissioner with us here today to answer some questions. The first page gives you a general overview. The agency protects insurance consumers of Kansas and the public interest through supervision, control, and regulation of persons and organizations transacting in the business of insurance within the state. The Insurance Department also houses the Office of the Securities Commissioner. The next few pages are giving a general overview of the agency and prior years. I would like to point out on page 5, we do have a list of performance measures. This will give you a little bit of a breakdown on how the agency is performing, and this is determined between the agency and the governor. I would like to then turn to page 8 and begin the FY 2021 overview. Right below the box, the agency estimates revised expenditures of $34.7 million, all from special revenue funds for FY 2021. This is an all funds increase of $707,822, or 2.1% above the FY 2021 approved amount. And this is attributable to increased expenditures for accounting services, litigation service supports, advertising for the new anti-fraud and investigate education campaign. The revised estimate also includes 136 FTE positions, which is an increase of 0.4 FTE above the approved number. The revised estimate is detailed below that. If you could turn the page, in the middle of the page, on page 9, we have the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends the FY 2021 expenditures of $35.7 million. This includes $976,666 from the SGF. This increase is 2.8% above the agency's 21 revised estimate. And this is the same amount as the FY 2020 lapsed funds from the privilege fee account for the SGF. This is a refund for the overpayment of privilege fees that was authorized for a company that is no longer doing any business in Kansas. And I'll stand for any questions for 21.
Questions? Seeing none, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. At the bottom of the page, for FY 2022, the agency requests $34.8 million, all from special revenue funds for FY 22. This is an all funds increase of $82,606, or 0.2% above the FY 21 revised estimate. And this increase is due to increased expenditures on salaries and wages and fringe benefits. The agency request includes 136 FTE positions, which is the same number as the 21 revised estimate. The expenditure breakdown follows that, and towards the bottom of the page, the governor concurs with the agency's request for FY 2022. And I'll stand for questions.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you. The remaining portion of the budget on page 13, you will have an overview of their funding sources, as well as the breakdown of the insurance company examination fund analysis, a security fee fund analysis, and the insurance department service regulation fund analysis. This is a completely fee-funded agency. And then starting on page 15, you will have a program breakdown of all the programs within the agency. And with that, I conclude my overview of the budget for the Kansas Insurance Department.
Thank you, Martin. Was there any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to Commissioner Vicki Schmidt, Insurance Department, WebEx. Welcome, Vicki.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is such a pleasure to be with all of you today, even though it is virtually. I appreciate the accommodation to do this in this manner. You know, it's always great to be back in that Senate Ways and Means Subcommittee. So thanks for the opportunity. The Kansas Insurance Department is really excited to be here today to present you our budget. Before I introduce the staff, I wanted to tell you about a couple of key things that is going on in the department this year. 1 month from today, on March 1st, we will be turning 150 years old, and we are so excited to celebrate the department's history. I'd encourage all of you to follow us on social media, because we're going to be doing a lot of fun things regarding that 150th anniversary. Secondly, I wanted to make note that this fall we will be going through the accreditation process that happens every 5 years with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. It's very, very, very important to the department. This is how we ensure that other regulators have confidence in what we do here in Kansas. And it also helps with looking for individuals and businesses looking to call Kansas home to know that we pass an accreditation study. You'll be hearing more about that from our staff. And I do want to take the opportunity to introduce our staff. Today in person in the committee room, we have Bobby Mariani. She is the Director of Administration and HR, and then Charlotte Daubert. She's our comptroller. Thank you again for the opportunity to come before you today, and I'll turn it over to them to give you those details. But I did want to thank Martin for your work on our budget. Thank you very much, sir. You did an excellent job. And I'd be happy to stand for questions if you like now, or if you would like to hear the presentation.
Is there any questions for? No. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we'll move on to Bobby Marinani. I butchered that, I'm sorry.
I should be used to doing that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. If I will, I'll be able to do this. Thank you for the opportunity to provide information about our insurance department budget. As our commissioner mentioned, she continues to look for efficiencies and determine department priorities that best serve the citizens and businesses of Kansas. Just a couple of things that I'd like to highlight, since Martin did go over all the numbers for you. I did want to mention, probably like every other state agency, we did have to manage the pandemic requirements. So We had to gear up with our technology to accommodate social distancing in the office and working from home. Literally, right now, everyone but our mail and our building service person have laptops so that we can accommodate working with the pandemic. We did have to make a few facilities changes to accommodate that as well, some plexiglass at the front reception area, some changes in how our walls and corridors are made. And then we, like everyone else, probably enhanced our cleaning protocols to keep everyone safe at the office. Also about our facilities, in November of 2019, we moved into our new building, which was designed as office space. We do appreciate the new space and having both divisions, insurance and securities, in the same building. Also, the building layout and the spaces that we have certainly helped us accommodate working through the pandemic as well. We did close on the sale of our building at 420 Southwest 9th on November 9th, 2020. So we are happy to be free from that and put that back on the tax rolls, if you will, and happy to be in our new location. As far as staffing the department, we are currently recruiting for an assistant chief examiner as well as some other vacant positions that have been funded. I will note that we do have difficulty recruiting financial examiners because of the accreditation requirements for what qualifications those positions have to have. We continually have to work to try to recruit and retain those positions. So you'll probably hear that about every time we present our budget. We also have recently filled the Securities Commissioner position after the retirement of Jeff Wagaman. Dan Klukas is awaiting a Senate confirmation hearing, so I'm sure you'll hear from him soon. And then we continue to gain administrative efficiencies and better coordination being in the same building. The priorities for our department, we do have a legislative agenda that will improve our regulatory process, specifically a bill that will be before you, the producer licensing bill, Senate Bill 37. This bill pertains to examinations, producer and public adjuster licensing requirements, renewal dates, agent conduct, suspicion, revocation of denial, fees and appointments and requirements. Several items in that bill are helping us with accreditation and just overall efficiencies in that process. We are eliminating some of the reporting requirements, and that will have a huge impact on our insurance regulation fee fund. This will eliminate business entities having to pay appointment renewal fees on affiliated agents that do not write business for the business entity. So we will be looking at a loss of revenue, if that bill should happen to pass, of approximately $5.23 million annually. And as the commissioner mentioned, we are preparing for accreditation in calendar 2021. So a lot of our staff's efforts will be focused on that. So as far as fiscal matters, the governor did recommend our budget. We would appreciate you supporting our department's request as well. As previously noted, we requesting an increase in 2021. Although our travel requirements are down with COVID, we had an increase in contractual services in the work comp fund for attorney fees, physicians, medical associations, hospitals, and nursing home, and capital outlay for the agency as a whole as we had to gear up with our technology to respond to the pandemic and working from home. There is also an increase in salary and wage expenditures, again, due to our consistent turnover in our examiner positions. We did make some increases there in order to retain those staff and try to draw in a better pool for us to hire from. Our insurance regulation fee fund does have a pretty good balance, but again, the department is looking at that balance to help accommodate should Senate Bill 37 pass with the reduction in fees to our business entities out there. That will help to spend down the balance in that fund. So with that, I would be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Bobby. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have Charlotte Debert.
in case I couldn't answer any questions.
Okay. Well, with that, we will, Senator Petty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Secretary of Insurance, Vicki Smith, who I miss seeing on the Senate floor. But I did want to ask, I know that you mentioned the close of the sale of your old building, and I do believe that last year, did we pass legislation and allow you to keep the, oh, we didn't.
No, we did have the sale of the building, and we did introduce legislation last year to allow us to keep the funds from that building, but because of the shortened session that we had last year, it just didn't make it all the way through. So we would have liked to, but we got the 20%, 80% went to Capers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll close that hearing on the Insurance Department, and we'll move on to the Judicial Council. And we have Stephen Wu with KLRD for an overview. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Excellent. For the Judicial Council's budget, I'd like to recognize that Nancy Strauss, the Executive Director, is on this call with us. For a brief overview, detailed on page 1 of the budget analysis, the Judicial Council's primary function is to study and recommend improvements to the administration of justice. It's comprised of a number of members, including one justice from the Kansas Supreme Court, that's currently Chief Justice Lukert, one judge from the Court of Appeals, 2 judges from district courts, 2 legislators, currently Representative Patton and Senator Warren, and 4 attorneys. The agency also has 5 staff members, which support its operations. And it has a number of advisory committees to help it study and research its variety of subject areas. Lastly, the Judicial Council has a number of publications. You can see these detailed on page 4. They range from the Pattern Instructions for Kansas Criminal, the PIK Civil. There's some probate forms, the Municipal Court Manual, and an Appellate Practice Handbook. Now, if we'll jump to the performance measures on page 6. I just want to go over these fairly briefly. There are 3 primary performance measures identified for this agency, and the first one is to study and improve the operations of the judicial branch through the use of these Judicial Council advisory committees. There are 13 standing ones right now, and they meet throughout the year to discuss and make recommendations. For fiscal year 21, the council anticipates holding 53 meetings, and that goes up to about 60 meetings estimated for 2022. Additionally, another measure we track are the distribution of legal publications. As I mentioned, the Judicial Council has 5 publications, of which it projects selling about a little over 2,200 of these publications in fiscal year 21. And a little over 1,000 of them for fiscal year 22. And lastly, like I mentioned, another measure we track are the promulgation of legal forms, which you can find readily available on the Judicial Council's website. Now, if we'll turn to page 10, we'll jump into the 21 budget. For fiscal year 2021, the agency requests a little over $613,000. This is all from special revenue funds, no SGF here. This is about a little over $16,000 less than the amount approved by the 2020 legislature. Now, this decrease is primarily due to lower spending on travel and temporary employee pay, in part to adjust for this past year of having to work more remotely. Fewer expenditures for travel were necessary for members to meet physically because members would be able to communicate virtually instead. This decrease is offset by slightly higher expenditures for software to help facilitate this remote work. And for this year, the governor concurs with this request. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the 22 budget since it's fairly similar to the 21 budget. You can find the details of this on page 11. For fiscal year 2022, the agency requests a little over $622,000. This is all from special revenue funds again. It's a slight increase, a little over $8,000 from the previous fiscal year, and this increase is primarily due to higher budgeted expenditures for temporary employee pay and it's offset by some lower expenditures for printing and binding of publications. This is a bit lower here because the publications that the Judicial Council puts out, they are on an alternating time schedule. So some publications are put out 1 year, some the following, and it rotates year to year. So the needs for printing and binding costs vary from year to year. The governor concurs with this as well. Like I mentioned, the council is entirely fee funded. You can see details of this on page 13. I believe there should be details on, yes, the Judicial Council Fund, which is their primary fund for its operations, as well as the Publications Fee Fund, which generates revenue through the sale of its publications. Now, that was a fairly high-level overview of the agency's budget requests for 21 and 22. I'd be happy to answer questions at this point. Would also like to, again, recognize that Executive Director Strauss is with us and would be able to answer any questions as well.
Thank you, Stephen. Do we have questions of Stephen? Seeing none, I don't know the first name, but Strauss, what was the first name? Becky?
Director Nancy Strauss.
Nancy, okay. Wouldn't Nancy like to comment at all? Okay. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and close our hearing on the Judicial Council. Now we'll move on to our 10:30 hearings. I thought we would do these two. These two should be rather quick, and then I thought afterward we would. Yes. Okay, we'll call our meeting to order, and we'll have a hearing on the Office of Administration. And to start that out, we'll have Elena Reuter with KLRD for an overview. Start that out, we'll have
Ruth Glover. Please
Yes.
mute
can you hear us?
Ruth, can you hear us?
Sorry about that.
Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Elena Rudder, and I'm a legislative fellow at KLRD, and I will be presenting the budget for the Office of Administrative Hearings. And before I get started, I would just like to note that the director, Cheryl Whelan, is also on the call, and she will give some remarks and be able to answer questions after my presentation as well. Okay, so to begin with, the Office of Administrative Hearings. The mission is to conduct fair and impartial hearings for citizens and other affected parties when they contest actions of state agencies determining their legal rights. The first few pages, the first 7 pages of the budget analysis give an overview, and I'd be happy to go into more detail on any of those pages. But without any questions regarding those pages, I would like to start on page 8 for fiscal year 2021 overview. On page 8, the fiscal 2021 revised estimate is $1.1 million, all from the Administrative Hearing Office Fund. This is an all funds decrease of $132,383, or 10.5% below the amount approved by the 2020 legislature. And the decrease is primarily attributable to a decrease in salary and wages and fringe benefits. And the revised estimate also includes funding for 13 FTE positions. And that is an increase of 1 FTE position from the amount from the number of FTEs approved by the 2020 legislature, and the increase in 1 FTE position is due to the addition of a law clerk position, and this position is only going to continue through this fiscal year, and then it will be converted to a unclassified non-benefits eligible position when the law clerk departs sometime in May. And on page 9 is the governor's recommendation for fiscal year 2021. And the governor recommends operating expenditures of $1.1 million from the Administrative Hearings Office Fund, which is the same as the agency's revised estimate. And the governor also recommends adding $20,259 from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which was awarded by the State Finance Council. And this additional $20,000 would be used to purchase personal protective equipment and to make some office modifications, such as keyless entry, a mail drop box for the public, and a video intercom system. And the governor agrees with the agency's request or revised estimate of 13 FTE positions. And with that, I'll pause if you have any questions regarding fiscal year 2021.
Questions on 21? Seeing none, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For fiscal year 2022, the agency requests operating expenditures totaling $1.5 million, all from the Administrative Hearings Office Fund. This is an increase of $355,517, or 31.6%, above the agency's fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. And the increase is primarily attributable to expenditures for salary and wages and contractual services. The agency's request also includes funding for 13 FTE positions, which is the same as the agency's revised estimate for 2021. On page 10, about in the middle of the page, is the governor's recommendation for fiscal year 2022. And the governor recommends operating expenditures totaling $1.4 million, all from the Administrative Hearings Office Fund. And this is an all funds decrease of $124,995, or 8.4% below the agency's request. And this is due to the governor not recommending the agency's 2 enhancement requests, which The detail is on the bottom of page 10 about that, and I will go over that briefly as well. And the governor's recommendation also includes funding for 12 FTE positions, which is a decrease of 1 below the agency's request. And this is also due to the governor not recommending one of the agency's enhancement requests for an administrative specialist. And the 2 agency enhancements are for pay increases for staff, and the agency states that its personnel, particularly administrative law judges and legal assistants, earn less than comparable state employees, which is why they had the enhancement request for pay increases. And the second enhancement request was $44,616 for an additional administrative specialist and 1 FTE position. And this position would provide administrative support to the agency and would relieve some of the relieve legal assistants from performing some of those administrative duties. And as I mentioned before, the governor does not recommend the funding nor the FTE position for fiscal year 2022. And with that, that concludes my overview of fiscal year 2022. Are there any questions?
Seeing none, thank you. Next we'll have Cheryl Whelan.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today. The Office of Administrative Hearings is an independent state agency that provides fair hearing services to other governmental agencies, mostly state agencies. Our focus is on providing all parties with due process through a fair and impartial hearing process. The agency is 100% fee funded by those agencies that we serve, except for some CARES Act funding that we utilized this year to ensure we were complying with public health measures due to the pandemic and to assist with remote work. We did have a second request for CARES Act funding granted after the governor submitted the budget, and that was an additional $3,577.32. So our total is $23,836.32. OAH continued to operate during the pandemic and found ways to deliver these essential services to Kansans. We had previously been working on a program to provide more virtual hearings in order to increase efficiency and reduce costs for all parties involved in our hearings. And when the pandemic occurred, we simply accelerated that process and have regularly been conducting virtual hearings using a Zoom platform. We conduct multiple day hearings. I think our longest hearing was 4 days by Zoom instead of in person, which was quite a cost savings. Our judges, our administrative law judges, we've had a couple openings the last few years, and we've had many experienced attorneys who were interested in those positions, but the salary would involve a pay cut substantial at times for those individuals. We've been very fortunate to hire high quality administrative law judges, some who have taken a pay cut to join us. But I'd like to keep those high quality individuals. These are not entry-level attorney positions. They require attorneys who've had a significant amount of experience in their careers. So with that, I will stand with any questions.
Cheryl, any questions for Cheryl? Seeing none, thank you. We'll close that hearing.
Thank you.
We'll now focus our attention on the Kansas Human Rights Commission. Elena Reuter, KLRD overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Elena Reuter, and I am a legislative fellow at KLRD, and I will be presenting the Kansas Human Rights Commission budget today. The Kansas Human Rights Commission, the mission is to eliminate and prevent discrimination and assure equal opportunities in all employment relations, eliminate and prevent discrimination, segregation, or separation, and assure equal opportunities in all places of public accommodations and in housing. And before I jump into the budget, I would also like to mention that the Executive Director, Ruth Glover, and the Assistant Director, Bill Wright, are also on the call with us today, and they will also be presenting and be able to answer any questions you may have. The first 7 pages of the budget analysis, again, are overview, and I could go into more detail on any of those pages if you would like. But I would like to begin on page 8 if you don't have any questions.
Please proceed.
Thank you. So for fiscal year requests, a revised estimate of $1.5 million, including $1.1 million from the state general fund. This is an all funds decrease of $198,136 or 11.8%. And it's also an SGF decrease of $45,000 or 3.9% below the amount approved by the 2020 legislature. Included in that is adjustments that were made to the state general fund budget that do not require legislative approval, and that is an increase of $45,635 based on a reappropriation of fiscal year 2020 funding that was not spent and shifted to fiscal year 2021. And it also includes the July 1st governor's allotment, which was a decrease of $4,016. Included in the agency's revised estimate is also funding for 23 FTE positions. And that is no change from the number approved by the 2020 legislature. On page 9, in the middle of the page, the governor concurs with the agency's fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. And that concludes fiscal year 2021. Are there any questions?
Questions on 21? Seeing none, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 10 starts fiscal year 2022, and the agency requests a fiscal 2022 operating budget of $1.6 million, including $1.2 million from the state general fund. This is an all funds increase of $89,946 or 6.1%, and an SGF increase of $50,313 or 4.6% above the agency's fiscal year 2021 revised estimate. And the increase is primarily attributable to the carrying forward of the $45,000 reappropriation for security upgrades for the Wichita office and for a database conversion from Microsoft Access to SharePoint. And the all funds increase is primarily due to increases in salaries and wages, contractual services, and commodities, and funding and it also includes funding for 23 FTE positions, which is the same as the agency's fiscal 2021 revised estimate. On page 11 is the governor's recommendation, and the governor recommends fiscal year 2022 operating expenditures totaling $1.5 million, including $1.1 million from the state general fund, and this is a decrease of $45,000, an all funds decrease of $45,000 or 2.9%, and an SGF decrease of $70,671 or 6.1% below the agency's request. And the state general fund decrease is primarily due to reductions in contractual services, which are associated with the agency's reduced resources budget, which is detailed below. And in the reduced resources budget, the agency submitted 4 projects to reduce their SGF monies by 10%. And these 4 projects were salary and wages, and the agency proposed to reduce SGF expenditures by $25,671 for fiscal year 2022. In the alternative to the SGF money, the agency proposed to submit or substitute the $25,671 from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission federal fund to pay for this SGF decrease. And the agency stated that the funding would allow the agency to continue operations without interruption, and noted that the reduction is approximately 45% of the cost of a Special Investigator 1 position. The second reduced resources project was to reduce SGF by $15,000 by not performing the security updates to the Wichita office. The third was to decrease SGF by $30,000 by not moving forward with the website development. And the final reduced resources project was to reduce SGF by $40,000 for the Access database and SharePoint conversion and updates. And then on page 12 is the governor's recommendation for the reduced resources. And the governor recommends a reduced resources budget of $70,671 from SGF. And this includes 3 of the agency's 4 reduced resources proposals. The governor recommends that the salary and wages reduced resources be substituted with the federal funds so that the agency can continue its operations without interruption. And then the governor also recommends that $40,000, all from SGF, not be reduced so that the agency can convert its database from Access to SharePoint. And with that, that concludes fiscal year 2022. The remaining pages go into more detail about the agency's 2 programs, and I'd be happy to go into more detail on that. But if not, I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Elena. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to Ruth Glover, Executive Director of the Kansas Human Rights Commission on WebEx.
I was muting myself. This is Ruth Glover with the Kansas Human Rights Commission. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today and to answer any questions that you might have. We are not appealing anything from the governor's budget recommendation. I am pleased to report that the agency was able to continue operations and performance during the time that state buildings were shut down for approximately 2 months from March to May due to the coronavirus. Our employees were able to telecommute and perform their duties from their homes, and we occasionally had someone come into the office to do things that needed to be done in the office. But our performance was very good this last fiscal year. We received 911 complaints of discrimination in fiscal year 2020, and that was very comparable to the number of complaints that we received the year before at 1,054. We were able to resolve 943 complaints this last fiscal year. And again, that's very comparable to the number of complaints that we received the year before, resolved the year before. We had resolved 1,119 complaints in fiscal year 2019. We were able to recover on behalf of individuals who alleged discrimination over $2 million this last fiscal year. And those are monies that are paid from the organization to the employee directly, and that's to help offset any wage loss or anything of that nature. It doesn't reflect non-monetary recoveries such as training or neutral references or maybe being reinstated to a job, anything of that nature. We were able to, the coronavirus did impact our public information program a little bit this last fiscal year. We were able to train 10,685 individuals this last fiscal year, and that was mainly through our online harassment prevention training program. We did offer in-person training, but those were canceled due to concerns about the coronavirus. We've been offering webinars, and individuals and employers are starting to do the trainings through the webinars, and we've had good success through those webinars. We weren't able to have our employment law seminar last year due to the coronavirus, but we're looking forward to maybe offering trainings through a webinar format this year. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ruth, and congratulations on your collections. That's outstanding. Keep up the good work. Appreciate that. Any questions? Seeing none, we will close our hearing on the Kansas Human Rights Commission. Okay, I think if the committee is okay, maybe we'll go ahead and deliberate these last two that was pretty non-controversial, and I think both of them had minimal cuts, and they had agreed with the governor on the cuts. So if we would like to deliberate the Office of Administration hearings, or the Office of Administrative hearing, okay, so on the administration, and the Kansas Human Rights Commission. Are you comfortable in deliberating that today and putting it behind us? Senator Petty?
I just had one question, and that was, the Office of Administrative Hearings brought forward the difficulty it is to get these administrative law judges, and I was just curious as to when was the last time there was a salary increase?
Is there someone on WebEx that can answer that, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Cheryl Whalen, Director of the Office of Administrative Hearings. We had a pay increase for the judges last January, February timeframe. Our starting salary at that time was $73,000. In order to hire our choice for the latest judge we hired in April, we had to bump that up to $80,000, along with commensurate raises for the other administrative law judges who had been here longer. And even then, that judge took a pay cut from her previous position as a deputy general counsel for a major state agency.
Did the governor give you any reasoning why she didn't approve the raise part of this?
No, my only understanding is that there was from talking with our budget analyst, the 2.5% proposal across the board for state employees. So I don't know anything other than that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Oh, thank you.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the Office of Administrative Hearings? Senator Kershaw makes the motion, seconded by Senator Petty. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We'll now move on to the Kansas Human Rights Commission. Any questions on the Kansas Human Rights? Seeing none, I would look for a motion. Senator Kershaw makes a motion, seconded by Senator Petty. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, I think what we'll do now is, I think we're going to go back to our first hearing, the 9:30, where this committee was involved. Or I guess let's just go this way on it. We had the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, and the Insurance Department and Judicial Council. Is there any other information we need on those? Are we comfortable in deliberating those today? Senator Petty?
Well, I did, with the Attorney General's office, I did ask questions about, I would like some further information, or at least for us to have the comparison with, in his budget, sorry, I'm missing my piece of paper here. Oh, it's on my notes. When it comes to the Kansas Youth Suicide Prevention Coordinator and he spoke to what they want to do in that position, but I think we need a little, as a committee, I think we need a little bit more information about what's already going on or is being funded through KDADS when it comes to that hotline and the national hotline. I don't know that we're going to, it's fiscally responsible to be funding two different call-in lines when we want to promote one that's going to have that has a national base. So
I might ask staff, being this is, what was done with a bill, that it is a law that, do we have any option? Is there anyone
Mr.
from?
Chairman, I did want to note that the Attorney General and Secretary of State had their hearing scheduled from 9:30 to 10:30, so they did have to leave. So our agency representation isn't here for recommendations.
Oh, okay, we'll wait on the Attorney General's then until we can get that answered.
Okay.
How about the Secretary of State's? Are we comfortable in deliberating that one?
They're not here either, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, was there any questions that needed answered before we deliberate that? I guess go that way. Okay, I don't either. You okay? Okay. Well, I'd look for a motion on the Secretary of State's to approve. Okay. We have a motion by Senator Fagg and a second by Senator Kirshen. Any other discussion or debate? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. The Insurance Department. Is there any unanswered questions there from anyone that we would need? Okay. So if there isn't, then I guess we'll go ahead and deliberate on the insurance. Is there any questions or discussion on the Insurance Department? Seeing none, I look for a motion. Senator Kirshen makes a motion, second by Senator Petty. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, then the last one would be Judicial Council. Was there any questions or anything that would keep us from deliberating on that one today? Seeing none, or is there any questions at all on that branch? Okay. We have a motion by Senator Fagg. Do we have a second? Senator Petty seconds. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Judicial Council passes. Okay, so we'll leave the Attorney General till a later time, and we'll get them questions answered. And so with that, we'll move to our first hearing, and we had two other conferees, so we'll wait just a minute to switch out the desk, and then okay. Yeah, I'm thinking, being that is law, we may not have a whole lot of leeway. Yeah. I would say that, with the pandemic and the amount of suicide with our youth, that anything we can do is going to be a plus, Okay, we will discuss the first item we had today, which was the State Historical Society. Is there any questions on the State Historical Society? Seeing none, do we have a motion? Senator Hawk makes a motion. Seconded by Senator Fagg. Any other questions? Senator Hawk?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I, sometimes we do this, I don't know if it's typical or appropriate, but I would like to personally commend them for the fundraising that they've been doing to try and get the capital outlay projects. That's a major undertaking. I wish we had more money available from State General Fund to help them out, and I'm pleased that the governor got $200,000 in there, but we've had meetings over previous years out there, and they really do need those repairs, being 37 years. So if it's appropriate to make that comment, assuming the motion passes.
And that's a great point. And for the two new senators, we approved the full amount last year, the 650. And then when the pandemic hit, the governor allotted that, so it didn't go. So they raised an additional 450. So our 650 went to 200. So that's what Senator Hawk was referring to. It's really good that they went out and were proactive and collected donations. Any other discussion?
Seeing none, I'd look for a motion. We had a motion and a second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes out. Okay, the last one we have is the state library. Any questions or anything on the state library? Senator Hawk?
I'm inclined to approve the governor's recommendation. When I first saw it, I saw that $4,000 that the governor partially concurred, but as I looked at their budget, I'm okay with that. So if you'd like a motion, I'll so move that we approve the budget
Okay, we have a
as the governor recommended.
We have a motion by Senator Hawk, second by Senator Erickson. Any other questions, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. With that, I think we've done all our work today except for the Attorney General, and when we get a couple questions answered there, we'll finish that deliberation. So thank you all today. Appreciate your help. We are adjourned.